In our history, the Bolsheviks, under the leadership of Lenin, had led a revolution that would establish the first communist state of the world. During their civil war with the White Movement, the conflict had spilled over into Poland. The Soviets were seeking to connect with the ongoing Spartacist revolution in Germany. Their hope was that if they could connect with each other, they would be able to spread the revolution to Europe. However, the Spartacist uprising had failed, and the Polish had managed to beat back the Soviet advance. During the armed conflict, Trotsky, leader of the Red Army, was in contact with Hans von Seeckt, leader of the Reichswehr. Trotsky had promised Seeckt that if he staged a border conflict between Germany and Poland, he would grant the Germans their eastern territories back. In our history, despite this offer, Seeckt did not end up staging a border conflict. In the German October timeline, Seeckt goes through with the border conflict instead of holding back. Poland is defeated and partitioned between the Soviets and the Germans. Weimar Germany's authority vanishes after Seeckt refuses the League of Nations mandate of Poland. A warlord period begins between separatists, national claimants, and communists. The opportunity for a world revolution was at hand, and the Red Army invaded Germany to support the communist revolts. After a year of fighting, the Soviets seemed to be in an incredible position to spread communism to Europe and the world. However, Trotsky had to sign a peace with the French, as their leader, Lenin, had died, and Trotsky was required back in Moscow to tend to the Union. With such a large USSR, with the industrial regions of Germany under their control, would they be able to industrialize earlier? What will the sudden spread of communism to Central Europe mean for Italy, France, and Britain? How will the lack of a German state impact the ideological alignment of the Germans? Welcome to German October, the third Loredad series. I hope you enjoyed this project. It has required the most research out of any project I've done before. A lot of it has become easier thanks to Serov, who has consulted me with suggestions and added clarification about Soviet politics in this era of history, so thank you very much. Without further ado, let's observe the ramifications of this point of divergence. As mentioned previously, Trotsky needs to leave the German front line and return to Moscow in order to stake his claim to leadership of the Union. However, we've already reached a point where I need to make a controversial claim, that Trotsky had aspired to be the leader of the Soviet Union. Throughout my research, I've heard conflicting claims regarding Trotsky's ambitions towards the USSR. Most frustrating is that he himself claimed different things at different points of history. This is an extremely difficult era of history to understand. I will do my best to present things non-partisan, so please bear with me as we get into this alternate history. Before Lenin's death, Stalin had made an alliance with two other prominent Soviet politicians, Kamenev and Zinoviev. These three made up the Stalinist triumvirate, specifically positioned against Trotsky in order to prevent his ascension to power in the Soviet Union. This alliance was quite warranted, as Trotsky's influence in the Soviet Union was immense. As the organizer of the Red Army and leader of the Petrograd Soviet, these three had banded together either to prevent Trotsky from coming to power for ideological concerns or personal ambitions to power. The exact determination depends on who you ask, but we will be focusing specifically on the ideological front, as the debate regarding the future of the Soviet Union in this timeline would be an intense ideological debate between the Leninists and the Trotskyists. And in order to fully understand, we need to understand very important things about socialism. Marx was a philosopher in early Victorian Europe who wrote the Communist Manifesto. His theories of socialism and communism has shaped the history of leftist movements through the world, as his philosophy became the mainline socialist position in a world where socialism was heavily split between several different ideological thinkers. Vladimir Lenin was a Russian citizen who grew up to be a communist revolutionary after learning about Marx and his theories. While Marx had predicted that communism could only come from socialism, and socialism could only come from capitalism, Lenin had managed to organize a communist revolution in a society that was considered feudal. This significant achievement had prevented the accusations of revisionism, and led to Lenin's Marxism to be called Marxism-Leninism. During the period of unrest in Russia during the First World War, Lenin had published his April thesis, advocating for a two-stage revolution in Russia. This policy was adopted by nearly all of Lenin's followers. However, Trotsky was initially reluctant to join Lenin's communist revolution. This seems incredibly strange. However, once you understand how Trotsky's ideology differed from Lenin's at the time, it'll make more sense. Do you remember when I was illustrating how Lenin adapted Marx's principles regarding the communist revolution and its requirements? Well, Trotsky was so strict a follower of Marx, he did not believe it was possible to achieve communism in Russia, as it was futile. Despite their ideological differences, Trotsky eventually joined the Bolshevik Revolution, becoming a zealous organizer of the army. Trotsky's determination to organize the army and his performance in conflicts like the Soviet-Polish War were also fueled by his ideology. Since Trotsky believed that Russia could not develop communism, he believed that it was necessary for communism to be spread to the industrial epicenters of Europe. This ideological tenet was called permanent revolution by Trotsky. After the miracle on the Vistula and the defeat of the Soviet forces, the dominant ideological trajectory following the Soviet-Polish War was socialism in one country. These two ideologies both wished to accomplish the same thing, but Trotsky did not adopt the socialism in one country position. In our history, due to Trotsky's refusal to adapt to the realities of the Soviet Union at the time, he was isolated ideologically. This left Stalin and his allies to eventually exile him from the country. Trotsky would go on to write many theories and books, antagonizing the Stalinists, before being assassinated in Mexico. However, in this timeline, due to the success of the Soviet Union in its war against Poland and then Germany, the Bolsheviks now had direct access to the largest industrial centers of Germany, Silesia and the Ruhr. Now, the debate between permanent revolution and socialism in one country was settled, and the most vocal proponent and the mastermind of the Bolshevik invasion of Germany was Leon Trotsky. Assured by the success of his ideology, Trotsky was convinced that he was fit to rule in the Soviet Union in this timeline. However, Trotsky was still being sidelined by the Stalin triumvirate and would need to return home in order to secure the revolution that he now believed was his success. This meant that Trotsky needed to sign a peace with the Western powers. The Soviet army under Trotsky would meet with the Western powers supporting the German breakaway states in Trier. This location was chosen by Trotsky as a means to show strength, as Trier was the birthplace of Marx. This peace would see several different stipulations being agreed upon. The West would acknowledge the Soviet annexation of northern Germany. The French popped-up buffer states of the Rhineland and Baden-Württemberg would be recognized by the Soviet Union. Bavaria too would be recognized by the Soviets in the West, but Bavaria would be forced to be neutral. This stipulation was incredibly critical for peace to be achieved between the East and West. This is because if the Bavarians were allowed to align themselves with the West, France would be able to make a direct land connection between themselves and Czechoslovakia. All parties would agree to this, but in reality, they had both begun covert attempts to instigate a revolution to become a government friendly to them. Once the treaty had been signed, the Soviets were finally at peace, and Trotsky would embark to Moscow, where he would claim leadership of the Soviet Union. However, in Trotsky's haste to claim leadership, an ideological infection would fester in Germany. Due to the point of divergence in its ramifications, a fringe political ideology, practiced by few and to the ridicule of many in our history, would begin to manifest a small but rapidly increasing following in Germany. In our history, and prior to German October's point of divergence, there were many communists in Germany who had so desperately wished to resist the imperialist Entente that they would adopt measures considered by many Marxists to be inconceivable. An alliance with nationalists. Heinrich Laufenberg was the progenitor of this ideology, which would be known as National Bolshevism. During the Spartacist Revolution, some revolutionaries were enthusiastic of this idea with working together with the evils you know in order to destroy the greater threat. But once Lenin had heard of this deviation, he had denounced it, and Heinrich had left the communist movement disgraced. While still denounced, and viewed as incredibly revisionistic, the Heinrich Laufenberg myth would perpetuate with increased vigor as his idea of a German alliance with the Soviets would become semi-prophetic, since the Bolshevik had spread the revolution to Germany. While the political field would be dominated by Marxist-Leninists and Trotskyists, and national Bolshevism was banned. The disenfranchised nationalists and petite bourgeois, who were soon to be subject to collectivization measures, would resonate with this ideology, even if it was only subconsciously. They would populate the ranks of the party, forming a fifth column within the Soviet Union, unrecognized by Trotsky or more senior party officials, as the turmoil of Lenin's succession trumps all other concerns. As Trotsky reaches Moscow, he begins his bid for leadership of the USSR. However, Stalin's triumvirate still holds significant influence. It would surely take any chance they get to diminish Trotsky's influence and prevent him from ascending to leadership. But how would Trotsky legally take over the Soviet Union? What would happen to those like Stalin who would resist? And what does Lenin's last testament say? All of these questions and more will be answered in episode 2 of German October, as the fate of the Soviet Union is sealed. Woo! German October is finally a thing. This, as I said in the beginning, took a lot of research. Thanks again to Serov for collaborating with me on this. I really wanted to make sure that I did my third series justice, take the things I learned from doing Stressa and Bourbon and apply it to this. And I hope you all stay tuned for the next episode. If you want to see the next episode as soon as it comes out, please consider subscribing. Shout out to Enzo Rafael Souza Silva, Louis Avant, Grud, Jubs, and Solo Leo for being channel members. Thank you so much for your support. If you want to have your name shouted out at the end of my video, please consider supporting the channel by getting a membership. If you're ever overthrowing a government, make sure to not give the communists guns. Hope you have a good day. Bye bye, Lord Boy.
Bye bye.
Have a good day.
Press a button.
If you press this button, then it'll stop. Press this on the mouse.
No.
Just click here. This one.
This one?
Yeah.